Good morning, all. On behalf of the board of the Connecticut Audubon Society, I'd like to welcome you to today's event. First, I'd like to thank Nelson North and his wonderful staff here, and if you would all, excuse me, Nelson, would you raise your hand, stand up and raise your hand, please? And would you have your staff raise their hands, please? People can't raise their left hand, otherwise occupied, but thank you all. And thank you for hosting us. Well, today is a seminal event in our annual calendar. We're releasing our latest annual Connecticut State of the Birds report. And I think you all have a copy of it. If you don't, we'll remedy that quickly. And it's entitled The Seventh Habitat and the Decline of Our Aerial Insectivores. And if that seems murky to some of you, stay tuned. It will all be revealed to you what it's about. Each year, our State of the Birds report highlights significant conservation challenges in the state. We make recommendations for what we believe we should do and others should do, and we also outline how we, as a society, intend to respond to part of these recommendations. Some of our recommendations we've made. This is our 8th, so it's 2006 was our first report. Some of our recommendations have been incorporated in new state laws, including last year's landmark Open Space Act. They've also led our society to increase the emphasis and focus we put on outdoor education of our children across the state. Our 2013 report looks at the long-term population decline of a category, or guild, as one of the authors calls it, a guild of birds that specialize in a diet of flying insects. These so-called aerial insectivores include barn swallows, purple martins, whippoorwills, common nightingales, chimney swifts, eastern kingbirds, and about a dozen other birds. And they're delineated in the centerfold of the report. It's well known to you, I'm sure, that problems in the environment often manifest themselves first in birds. Birds are an indicator when something is wrong. If you are concerned about the conservation of birds and their habitats as we are, you will soon realize that the drop in population of aerial insectivores, or any of our bird species, may well be a sign of a larger, more serious problem in our environment. As always, our State of the Birds report, it's no different, contains recommendations of what needs to be done. But this report is a little different. It acknowledges that we don't know yet why completely. We don't know the root causes of why our aerial insectivores population is declining. And while there are some actions we can take now, you will notice in the recommendations at the end of the report, after you've looked at our state of knowledge, one of the recommendations and one of the observations is that much more research needs to be undertaken. And we will prime this as one of our actions, is to prime this research. We have a number of important speakers here today, and afterwards we'll be glad to take questions and answer the questions and respond to the news media as well. First, I'd like to introduce Robert Martinez, President of the Connecticut Audubon Society, who will introduce our speakers for the day. Bob?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. As Ralph points out, this is our 8th annual State of the Birds. And over the course of that period of time, we've touched on many of those issues that face the specific conservation issues that we face here in the state of Connecticut. Much of which, of course, as we all know, with birds showing declines in populations, that's usually indicative that there's other issues that we need to deal with. Our State of the Birds reports attempt to provide pragmatic solutions to those and to give people some thoughts and to start to work the issues that we see and are highlighting that there's ways that we can improve. We've talked in the course of our prior reports about at least the 6 habitats that we see here in the state of Connecticut, but this year's a unique issue. It talks to a 7th habitat, and it's one in which all of us live. When you think about the previous 6 that we've talked about, forests, grasslands, coastals, one thing that is very common to all of us in our own habitat is when we walk outside, when we're inside, the air that we walk through, actually the atmosphere, it is a habitat. When you think about how dense it really is, filled with insects, and many of us don't recognize that on a day-to-day basis. However, some of the most beautiful birds that we see are our aerial insectivores, and they live in that environment, and in fact they use that environment to feed. What we're finding, and not what we're finding, but what the experts are finding, and the people that we've put together into this publication this year, is that there is a significant decline in aerial insectivores, and it is primarily in northeast United States and eastern Canada. So as we look at this, there's many things that we don't know why that decline is happening, and this report deviates a little bit from the ones that we've had in the past. We've always provided recommendations, attempted to tie together the best solutions possible for our recommendations. But in this case, what we're finding is there's just not enough information out there. And what we'll be calling for is more knowledge and more information and get more outreach of the people that are really studying this. So in order to compensate for that dearth of scientific knowledge, those kind of recommendations are tough to make this year. But we intend this report, our 2013 State of the Birds, to be a wake-up call. For all intents and purposes, as we've known for a long time, birds as indicator species tell us what's happening and things that we need to worry about. DDT, for instance, we noticed the decline in raptors as a result of the use of DDT. We fixed that, we collectively as a population. And here's an issue that we're seeing without an immediate answer right now. So we recognize that there's a serious problem that exists as our bird life declines, but there's not enough research and we're not quite sure why they are declining. So in order to get down to the serious business of identifying the causes and working towards solutions, we put together this year's State of the Birds report, the 7th habitat, the decline of our aerial insectivores. And as always, this is not a Connecticut Audubon Society idea. This is the collaboration of all the experts that are out there, the best minds and the best spots that we can find. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our contributors and our authors as well. This year they include John D. McCracken of Bird Studies Canada, David Ward Winkler from Cornell University, Margaret Rabaga, who is the Connecticut State ornithologist and a professor at the University of Connecticut, Shannon Kearney-McGee, who is with the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection, Energy and Environmental Protection, Tanner Stevens of Yale University, John Totten of the Purple Martin Association, Wayne Peterson of Massachusetts Audubon, and Jenny Dixon from the Connecticut State Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. So this was a very collaborative effort, and I also need to acknowledge the efforts of our Chairman Emeritus, Steve Orsman, who worked very closely with Miley, who is our editor-in-chief, on this. And I think at this point it would be a good opportunity for us to have Miley come up and talk a little bit more about what the report is, what our recommendations are, and where we're going. So, Miley, if you would.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, Ralph. This has been a collaborative effort when, we noticed across the board that certain bird species are declining We noticed that 50% of our bird species in Connecticut seem to be on the decline. But we were made aware of this particular issue from one scientist talking to another, when not only individual species were declining, but this whole group, this whole suite, this whole guild of birds, from flycatchers to swallows to purple martins, seemed to be declining some more rapidly than others. And so we began to try to look at that, and we found out that certain researchers are interested in this and looking. There was a conference in Toronto, I think it was Toronto last year, on bird populations, and one of the focuses of that conference was this decline of what we call aerial insectivores. So we decided that this would be a good year to highlight the decline of aerial insectivores in our State of the Birds, mostly to bring awareness so people understand that this particular suite of birds is declining and how important it is to us. Because let's face it, insects are an important part of our lives. They share our habitats, they eat our food, they bite us, they carry diseases, they pollinate our flowers. And so if there's a whole suite of birds that depends upon flying insects for their survival, and this whole group is declining, something's wrong in the state of Denmark. So we put this whole report together based on the decline of these birds. And then, of course, there was the problem, since we aimed this report at the layperson and members and legislature and not necessarily professional ornithologists, we try to couch it in terms that people understand. So there was a problem of, what are we going to title this report? So, really the decline of our aerial insectivores kind of sounds like some kind of reduction in bug spray. But I mean, there were no other choices. So we decided the decline of our aerial insectivores, and then to describe what aerial insectivores are and what the decline means. So that's basically what we did. And as Bob mentioned, we put together as many of the prominent ecologists and scientists as we could to talk about what the report. And if you go through the report, you'll see that John McCracken, who's the Director of National Programs for Bird Studies Canada, he talks about this mysterious decline. Why are these birds declining? Is it food related? Is it chemicals? Is it changes in the atmosphere? Is it the fact that some of these birds are dependent on man-made structures for their living? We're not producing enough of these structures. So is there a loss of open country foraging habitat? In other words, many of these birds migrate to warmer climes for the wintertime. Have those habitats in South America and Central America changed? Have the insect populations changed there so they're not getting the nutrition they need? There's lots of different possibilities. Insect availability, exposure to environmental contaminants. But there seems to be no single magic bullet on why all these species, from what we call salliers, which are little flycatchers that sit on a bush, wait for a fly to come by, or an insect, fly out, catch it, bring it back and eat it. The salliers, like our least flycatchers, our phoebes, our wood peewees, etc., as well as the birds we call coursers, which are the swallows and the martins and nighthawks that actually just swoop constantly through the sky, sort of seining the sky for insects. They all seem to be on the decline, but there doesn't seem to be a real answer as to why. There's lots of interesting possibilities, one of which we touched upon that David Winkler, Dr. Winkler at Cornell touches upon, which is, as Bob mentioned, what's in our atmosphere. This is sort of a whole new science of the biology of what lives in the air column. And we found out through advanced radar techniques, not myself, obviously, but scientists in Europe who have developed these advanced radar techniques where they can actually identify droplets within a cloud, suddenly found that there is this huge biomass of animals that live in the air above us that we don't see. It's largely invisible to us. So when we look at purple martins swooping through the air, or we see barn swallows sliding around, we know they're catching food, but we can't see exactly what it is. But there is this amazing mass of insects, and some Louisiana scientists found that in a 1 square mile of atmosphere at any given day, on any different month in Louisiana, something like 35 million insects are in this cloud that is above us, that largely invisible to us. Is that changing? Is climate change affecting that? We find now that the scientists tell us that these insects that are in this cloud will migrate thousands of kilometers to take advantage of a breeding area that might not be available to them if they hadn't gotten up into the air column. And not only do they get up into the air column and migrate, but they actually take advantage of cross winds in the upper atmosphere to move to these areas. I mean, it's pretty amazing stuff, and it's a new science. Boston University has started this science called aeroecology, and so it's a relatively new science. So all this throws into the mix, and so we're trying to figure this out, why this entire suite of birds is declining. And this is what our report deals with. Not only the species, certain species in Connecticut. Shannon McGee is here, who helped co-author the article on chimney swifts, but we've got an article on purple martins by John Towton. We have an article on bats, because bats are also aerial insectivores, so they're part of this, and our bats are declining as well. So not only do we have individual scientists reporting on their activities, documenting the decline of these species, but also we kind of explore the hows and whys and what are the possibilities, in the hopes that we'll be able to inspire science, academia, and others to become aware and maybe work together to try to look at what some of the possible solutions are. It's a whole new science, and it's to me, it was very, very interesting. So I had a lot of fun looking at this issue, and I hope you do as well. Some of these birds that are in decline are birds that are entirely dependent upon us for their reproductive success. Things like barn swallows, for instance, nest largely on rafters in barns. Chimney swifts, of course, use empty, abandoned chimneys in the summertime to raise their young. And one of our most declining species, purple martins, completely depend upon man-made housing for purple martin reproduction. So we're trying to encourage the erection of purple martin colonies and to bring the purple martins back. We've been fairly successful with a lot of help from a lot of really great volunteers. Phil Donahue is here. Phil, would you stand up for a second? I think most of you know Phil as an Emmy Award-winning talk show host and movie producer, but we know Phil as the Purple Martin landlord of the decade. Phil has been very helpful with us. We've got a big colony in Westport at Phil's place, where we raised over and banded over 180 young last year. He has 48 purple martin gourds that are all occupied by purple martins every year. And now we're trying to reproduce his success and his interest in other areas of the state. And Phil's been a big help with that too, because he's got his own website called gazebophil.com, where you can actually look in. You can spy on the goings-on inside these gourds while the adults are building their nest, mating, raising their young. You can see the different stages of insects that they're feeding the young, actually to fledging. And it's right on Long Island Sound. And Phil encourages everybody to go to that website, which is a remarkable and a wonderful educational tool. And so we're so happy that Phil is helping us with the purple martins. But as I said, that's just one segment of a problem that seems to be affecting all our aerial insectivores. So without belaboring it anymore, you can tell it's one of my favorite subjects. I encourage you all to please take a look at our State of the Birds. Pass it along to your neighbors and friends who are interested in birds. And that's all I have to say. Is that enough, Bob?
And there will be question and answers. We'll get Miley back up here, but I did want to acknowledge a few other people, specifically who have joined us today, Elizabeth and Susan Whalen, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Could you say a few words for us? Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here to talk about this incredible report. I read it cover to cover when it came in, and I have to say the thing that struck me most was that if you're an aerial insectivore, imagine traveling at 35 miles an hour and without your hands being able to catch an M&M. That really stuck with me as a pretty remarkable feat. I'm not sure I would last long if I were an aerial insectivore. But I think the other thing that I learned from this, and it's already been referenced by Miley and Bob, that the clear blue sky up there isn't so clear. It's really full of all manner of insects that are important to a variety of birds. And I will now share with you a deep, dark secret. Although I am a passionate gardener, the one thing that creeps, crawls, walks, flies that excites me the least are spiders. And so when I learned that the air column is full of flying spiders, I am determined that I'm going to wear my garden hat. But I'm glad that they're providing a food source for so many fabulous bird species. Certainly the population trends that are in the various articles in these reports are a serious concern, and all kidding aside, my arachnophobia. And we as environmental stewards really have to do all that we can through our conservation and education efforts to try to understand what's happening with these bird species and their food supplies, and do whatever we can to reverse this trend. One article I was particularly proud to read was the DEEP's supervising biologist, Jenny Dixon, wrote an article about bats, which I think most people wouldn't ordinarily think of in this context with a society that has, primarily birds in its interest. But certainly bats have more than their challenges these days, with the appearance of white nose syndrome that has decimated certain populations. And in our efforts to create greater energy, diversity, and independence, we've created wind towers and turbines that can be particularly deadly to certain species of bats, so that's a real issue. And Jenny's article really struck home with me because for 15 years I lived on a property that had a barn that was home to a maternity colony of large brown bats. And it was a colony that was studied for 20, 30 years by Dr. Tom Kuntz from the Boston University program, and I got to know him, his graduate students, and the bats very well in the 15 years that I lived on that property. And even though we had horses and gardens and wetlands as part of this property complex, the bats and the barn swallows really kept it comfortable for us human beings who were living there, so that they were definitely doing their job. So I have a warm spot in my heart for bats, and as a result of that experience, and I do hope that we'll be able to find both a way to stem the tide of the white nose syndrome and also maintain the diversity that they need for both habitat and home. The other article that I read with particular pride was the article on chimney swifts, because it was written by our own avian population specialist, Shannon Carey-McGee, along with Margaret Rubega of UConn and Tanner Stevens at Yale University School of Public Health. And what intrigued me was how well these little birds have managed to dodge efforts at study by many scientists. They haven't taken to human-provided nest sites that people have worked so hard to construct. They're not divulging where they winter in South America. They're not sending us postcards. And they've got virtually inaccessible nest sites that make studying their young extremely difficult. So it's a real challenge for the avian scientists who are trying to learn more about chimney swifts. But the marked decline in their numbers is certainly an area of emerging concern, and we're going to have to work really hard to understand what's happening with these wonderful little birds in our yards in the years ahead. So through these and all the other wonderful articles in the seventh habitat, it's very clear that our scientific study and conservation efforts are really critical to the survival of aerial insectivores. And our role at the DEEP is to work closely with our partners in conservation to share the best research that we have, to share our knowledge, to share our goal of educating the public, particularly children. I think we're all understanding that we have to develop the next generation of environmental stewards. And through the work that we collectively do, we can ensure that, that the next generations after us will care as much as we do about our natural world. I think we also have to look at, you know, the means to ensure the proper and cautious use of pesticides, make sure that we have the best available habitat. Reference to purple martins, I certainly can't compete with Mr. Donahue, but at Hammonasset Beach State Park, we do have a purple martin colony there that's small but thriving. So we'll have to look at your website to see what successes we can learn from you. But all these things, I think, maintaining the best available habitats and ensuring that these avian insectivores have the broadest possible opportunities for habitat and reproduction is really our charge as environmental stewards. And we all need to work together because none of us can do it alone. So that's my commitment to you, that we at DEP will do that. Now, I'll close with saying that since I was here last, we've had Tropical Storm Sandy and most recently the Storm Nemo, so it frankly wouldn't surprise me if all the bugs in the world were blown across the country. It's been an amazing year, and certainly Connecticut's bird populations will be a very interesting study for us in the breeding season ahead. So much of Connecticut's coastline has been altered, in particular by these storms. And we are working very closely with our partners at Audubon and our other conservation partners to ensure that the federal money that has been approved by Congress will come to Connecticut so that we can begin to understand what's happened to our coastline, what's happened to our habitats for these important bird species. And so I commit to you that we're working very hard to ensure that our congressional delegation is aware of our needs, that the various federal agencies are aware of the ideas that we have to help study and restore Connecticut's coastline for the maximum opportunity for birds and for humans alike. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I've enjoyed being here today, and talk with you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I think that there's a real piece, well, a lot of key elements in that statement, but we need to partner. That's the real key. We need outreach, we need partnering. No one group, no one organization can do this all alone. So the more that we can do to work as teams here, I also echo that feeling of each and every one of our members, please contact your local representative and talk to them about gaining additional funding for shorebird studies, beach studies, all those things that are available out there that have been recently released. It won't come to Connecticut without some help from our legislators, so please feel free to write your legislators on that. But again, when it comes to teaming, we're also fortunate to have with us today Kathy Vanderout. Kathy happens to be a board member at our Fairfield region. She also happens to be the vice president of Connecticut Ornithological Association. And once again, when we do our outreach, Kathy, if you could say a few words on behalf of COA.
Hi, everybody. I have a cold. I'm here today not as a Connecticut Audubon member and board member, but for the Connecticut Ornithological Association. And we're the only statewide organization devoted to birds and birding in Connecticut. And it's an all-volunteer association with membership ranging from your backyard birder to professional ornithologists and educators in ornithology. But we're all united by our passion for birds. An organ of the COA, the Avian Records Committee of Connecticut, is in charge of the official Connecticut bird list and also adjudicates records of rare sightings or unusual birds in Connecticut and decides whether they should go on the list or not. We have two publications, the Quarterly Connecticut Warbler, which is a journal, an ornithological journal, and the Bulletin, which gives news, birding news from Connecticut. We give workshops, and we have a listserv, internet listserv, where any birder, you don't have to be a member to attend our workshops or participate in the listserv, but anyone can just post a sighting that they've seen, interesting birds that they've seen. And we also have our annual meeting, if I might be permitted to plug, coming up on March 23rd, and we'll have 3 educational, exciting speakers. The keynote speaker is going to be Dr. Steve Kress, who's worked with decoys restoring seabirds to their historic habitat. It's been groundbreaking, especially in the coast of Maine, in Gulf of Maine, where he's worked to restore the Atlantic puffin to the Maine Islands. But COA works actively to provide the best available scientific data on the status of Connecticut birds and their habitats. For this reason, we're particularly enthusiastic about this year's State of the Birds report, and we thank Connecticut Audubon for sponsoring this and putting it out all these years. But it addresses a subject of concern to all birders, which is the decline of the avian insectivores. And those are the birds, as you've said, that dine on the wing, snapping insects out of the air, the whippoorwills and the chimney swifts. I remember the calls of the whippoorwills from when I was a child. It was a favorite summer noise of the evening. How long has it been since you heard a whippoorwill? And the ball games, all the nighthawks swarming around the lights at the Red Sox games. And, you know, occasionally you'll see a nighthawk during migration at a ball game when you're, even on TV you can see them sometime, but they're all just in very serious trouble. And the causes are very little researched and poorly understood. So for these reasons, we thank Connecticut Audubon for calling attention to this important issue, and we hope that the scientific community will take note and do something about it, because without avian insectivores, life would be much different for us. Most people don't realize that, how much of a difference it would make, but it would make a very big difference, and thank you for putting this issue to the forefront.
Thank you, Kathy. That's very well put. We're also fortunate to have someone other than Mila, who is one of our authors, with us today, Shannon Kieran McGee. If you'd like to come up and tell us a little bit about your article and what you think and how things are going. Welcome.
Thank you. So first, I also would like to extend thanks to Connecticut Audubon for this really important report that really highlights the perplexing decline of aerial insectivores, as everyone sort of keeps reiterating. This is really near and dear to my heart, because for the past 8 years, I have been working on federal grant money at the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, Wildlife Division, in cooperation with many partners on aerial insectivores. Some of the partners, and I just want to name them, because it's important to realize that there's a lot of people thinking about this, and we still are at a lack of coming to an answer. University of Connecticut, Connecticut Audubon, Audubon Connecticut, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, the Purple Martin Conservation Association, various Northeast coordinated bird monitoring partnerships that involve organizations all the way from Maine to West Virginia. And I need to mention all of the dedicated volunteers who have put a lot of time and effort into collecting data towards our investigations. We couldn't have done this without their help. And I won't list again all of the birds, people have been listing them, but they are a really diverse group of birds in many, many different habitats. And that's something that is very strange about this group, and why this group has kind of been ignored in the past, is because they've been lumped into other habitats. Some of the flycatchers have been thrown into wetland habitats or into grassland habitats. There are some that kind of fell through the cracks like the chimney swift, because they weren't really in any habitat that we would think about. But they all eat aerial invertebrates. And as a group, as an aerial insectivore group, they are disappearing faster than any of the other threatened passerines or perching birds. And even more marked is the fact that they are declining faster and very fast compared to wetland birds, which across the nation actually are increasing. We often talk about the decline of birds, and it's this sort of ubiquitous thing, but in fact, wetland birds are actually increasing. So there is something going on. It's not just a all bird decline. And then again, as people have mentioned, it really is a northeast focused decline. which leaves us with two gargantuan questions. One, why are they declining in the first place? And secondly, why are they declining faster here? And there's been a number of reasons, and a lot of these reasons have kind of sought at the lowest hanging fruit, which is, do we have limited nesting habitat? And continually, our research actually indicates that we don't have limited nesting habitat for a lot of these species. This is really apparent in the species that I'm focusing on right now, which is the chimney swift. It's a bird that is so adaptable that when we cut down all their trees, they move to our chimneys. So they really aren't that picky. This bird spends its entire life on its wing, for all intents and purposes, except for when it returns to the chimney at night to roost and feed its young. We learned from our research that this bird in the Northeast is not limited by our chimneys. And it appears from our monitoring that the large number of the birds that are returning each summer might actually not be breeding. And so this could be a huge problem. If these birds are flying all the way from the Amazon basin here to the state of Connecticut for our presumably abundant food source, and then they're not breeding, after time, that's going to take a toll on the population. We're not really sure what it means yet, and we're not really sure if it's different from history, because this is a new thing that we're investigating. But it seems kind of severe. Again, with the common nighthawk, which is as recent as the mid-'80s, was seen nesting in our urban areas on rooftops. We've done searches for these birds on rooftops that are suitable for these birds, and they're not here. They're simply not here. They fly over during migration, they skip right over Connecticut, they keep going. Why aren't they staying to nest? And even purple martin, which we consider their most limiting issue is their nest boxes, and that we need to manage nest boxes. We have nest boxes in colonies at Connecticut State Park where birds aren't actually moving into these nest boxes. They're managed. There's no reason we can't figure out. They're just not moving in. And so we suspect that, perhaps it could be that they're limited by food, even at a place like Connecticut State Park. So these birds are eating aerial insects, and it's really tough for a lot of people to think that perhaps they could be in a food shortage. I mean, there's enough mosquitoes out there, as far as we're concerned. But it's a little bit more complicated than just mosquitoes, as Miley had begun to tell us. And I'm going to use an analogy to give you an idea of how the birds look at this. So if you were in a grocery store and they replaced all of the food with celery, there would still be the same amount of food there, but it really wouldn't be enough for you to eat, or for the entire community to eat. And so it's not a question of whether there are enough bugs in the air, but whether there are enough of the right kind of bugs in the air. So what are these bugs in the air? We know they're probably mosquitoes, but they don't necessarily have to be mosquitoes or even anything that flies. As Miley was saying before, anything that gets caught up into the airstream can become an aerial invertebrate. These include ants, these include nymphs, these include spiders. As you told, in fact, spiders are probably a really good meal for these birds. And these can occur in heights up to 15,000 feet. And then secondly, these birds, when they're flying through the air and trying to catch aerial invertebrates, they're going to try and be the most efficient and get the most food for their energy. And so something like a fly may not give them as much energy as something like a beetle. And we actually, from our research, have evidence that these birds are not getting as many beetles in their food as they are flies. And this could be a serious consequence for their ability to gather enough food and have enough energy to raise their young. So why might there be a change in the fly and beetle abundance, or even the spider abundance? We actually don't even know if there is a change. But we do know that DDT had a profound effect on the abundance of these animals in the environment, these invertebrates in the environment at one point in time. It's now been banned here in North America, where the birds spend their summers, but we have no idea what's going on in South America and what could be happening to their food sources there. So if food is the reason behind these birds' declines, we're still not exactly sure, and there's so many hypotheses that we have yet to investigate. These birds could be declining because of other reasons, like climate change. Increased storm intensity can actually cause the migration path of these birds to be interrupted. It could reduce their survival along migration. And indeed, we do see lower survival rates for birds who travel longer distance during migration. Also, the changes in storm frequency can be affecting things like bank swallows with more floods and basically interrupting their breeding because their nest sites are being flooded. These storms could also affect the availability of the bugs in the airstream for these animals to forage upon. It could be something as simple as what it is for the other birds, which is our local land use and our lack of native plantings. It could be affecting the insects that are produced by the environment, and as well as what's available out there for these birds to eat. Another aspect, it could be a buildup of contaminants in their food source. The Biodiversity Research Institute has evidence of mercury in bats that's above safe levels. These birds are eating essentially the same food that the bats are eating, and these contaminants could also be affecting their behavior and health. So it could be perhaps that there's enough food, but the food that they're eating is making them crazy. So they're just not reproducing because their brains are being affected by the chemicals. And again, there's unknown threats in South America. So moving forward, what do? Well, we continue to sort of pick away at these hypotheses that we have and try to find the answers as we move along. But smaller things that we can do just day to day around our homes is think about the aerial insectivores and plant native plantings, avoid using pesticides, and of course raise awareness of these declines, which Connecticut Audubon is doing so well with this resource and this report. And hopefully we can move forward and find out specifically what the causes of decline are for each of these species, and in doing so we can help stop them. Thanks.
Thank you, Shannon. We were challenged this year, for sure.
I have one more person to introduce, if I could,
Absolutely.
before you wrap up. Thanks. I'd like to introduce my counterpart, who is chairman of the board of Audubon, Connecticut, not to be confused with the Connecticut Audubon Society. Martin Cannon, would you please stand up?
Yeah, thank you.
Bob
Real
spoke.
treat, thank
You don't have to speak. Bob,
Those are my prepared remarks.
I don't want to put you on the spot. Bob spoke a minute ago about partnerships and alliances to get things done, and this is a natural one. So last year, the two organizations formed a partnership, which is known as Audubon Alliance for studying shorebirds. And we did a model study last year of the two particular kinds of shorebirds, the piping plover and the least tern. And we are teaming up again to do that this year. It's even more important this year because we'll be studying the nesting results of the shorebirds post Hurricane Sandy. And it's really important that we get a baseline of how the struggling shorebirds are doing for that. And I'm very pleased that the two organizations have agreed to team up again, and we'll be repeating the study. I think that's a wonderful thing, and we have more opportunities to collaborate, and we will be doing that, both from the grassroots and at the level that Marty and I are at of bringing our boards together and talking things through. So I wanted to put that on the table, especially Susan, to show you that we are attempting to conserve resources and maximize our impact.
That's great. Glad you worked with
I stated earlier, this has been a challenge. As Miley pointed out, we've identified a habitat that we didn't really think about before. And in all of our previous State of the Birds, we had concrete recommendations. We didn't want to just throw things out there to say, hey, here's a problem with somebody else's problem. We tried to provide pragmatic solutions to those, recommendations that could be implemented, working as teams. This one's not quite so easy. I think we've all identified that there is a decline in aerial insectivores. Now what? And as part and parcel of that, the recommendations that we had this year, while not as concrete in prior years, it really is working more in team and in fashion, to reach out to all of the experts and to try and convene those experts here in one place and discuss what all the options are, what some of the considerations are. So that's gonna be the focus that Connecticut Audubon Society brings to this issue this year. We will try to convene a convention of the best minds on these subjects, and that's kind of the recommendation that we're going forward with, and we're speaking as being ourselves on the hook to do this. So, in addition to some of the other things that we can help collectively to work on, like elimination of certain pesticides and places where pesticides are used, and really supporting more study in this area. But I think our biggest effort will be a convention of the professionals in this, and stay tuned for more information. So with that, we'll throw this open to the floor for questions for Miley or Shannon or anybody else. Yes?
What altitudes are occupied by different kinds of birds? Where do they tend to migrate? What altitude do they tend to hunt?
A great question. Miley?
Different species are occupy different layers in the atmosphere. Some geese and cranes can go up to, 15,000 feet when they're migrating, Shannon, across mountains?
Yeah, those would be the ones over the Himalayas.
Yeah.
That's right below, I'd
Yeah.
say.
But as far as feeding goes, things like barn swallows tend to skim the surface right close. Other birds like purple martins can feed up 400 feet up in the air. So there's, the insectivores are fairly low, whereas the migrants can go, pretty high.
Do you think that density of aircraft traffic might have something to do with this? Has anybody thought about that?
Actually, one of the number one species that is in aircraft collisions is the chimney swift.
What altitude?
Well, they're usually, between 1,500 and 2,000 at foraging. I'm not sure what altitude the airplanes fly at, but they're a common collision species.
So little screens in front of the air tape,
No,
Yeah.
fruits.
Yeah, the fruits, right. Any other questions, comments, criticisms, suggestions, recommendations? Anyway, we'll be here, so thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you read the report and pass it along to your neighbors, friends, kids, relatives, etc. So, thank you.